Hello, and thanks for watching the Friends of the Farms lecture series. My name is Candace Hawes, and I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us from the pharmacy, the pottery, and the Natural Healing Center, or those who may be found us browsing on the internet. In this session, we're going to explore the crucial role that cannabis plays in providing comfort and enhancing the quality of life for individuals facing the end of life journey. We're honored to have the esteemed guest speakers, Dave and Chela Coennen, joining us to share their expertise and experience in the profoundly important topic. Facing end of life circumstances can be both emotionally challenging for individuals and their loved ones. Cannabis has emerged as a potential source of comfort and relief, offering a range of benefits for patients dealing with pain, discomfort, anxiety, and other symptoms associated with end of life care. Throughout this webinar, we aim to shed light on the potential benefits of cannabis in the end of life care, debunk myths, and offer practical guidance for patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals. Our guest speakers are Dave and Chela Coennen, bringing years of experience with deep passion for supporting individuals during this vulnerable period. Dave and Chela Coennen started as family caregivers and were inspired by Chela's mother's decades-long journey with Alzheimer's dementia. They're now taking care of Chela's father, who has also had his own healthcare issues and is using cannabis to manage his own healthcare. During their education through Alzheimer's and related dementia, they were average working people thrust into family caregiving through the life-changing experience. They became fierce advocates and educators. The couple launched the Cannabis Helps Dementia podcast. They also started Coach Chela Consulting and wrote the movie script loosely based off their experience, called The Last Resort, an Alzheimer's pot dramedy. They also authored a book, CBD for Seniors, 12 Essential Things to Know When Trying CBD and Medicinal Cannabis to Ease Symptoms of Aging and Improve Brain Health, which is available on Amazon. In their short Cliff-style guidebook, they've extracted the most essential information that they've learned since beginning their journey in using CBD and medicinal cannabis to help people in relationships with dementia. Chela and Dave learned so much and saw so much that they started the Care Gap coaching and provided plant-based education to caregivers and organizations. CBD for Seniors draws on their many years of caregiving experience, as well as their interviews they've conducted with Cannabis Helps Dementia podcast. After more than 25 years as working as crew in film and TV production, it's now Dave and Chela's mission to improve the lives of older people experiencing debilitating illnesses through care gap training and plant-based education. I'm happy to have them both with us today.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you so much for that great introduction.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you guys with us today. We had a really great first webinar with you guys when we talked, like I said, more about Alzheimer's dementia and how to take care of, loved ones and assist them with like CBD and cannabis. And so, I thought this was a great webinar to build on that. There's so many families that come into our dispensaries here. This is such a difficult and fragile period of life, and they have so many questions, and I thought that you guys were would be a great couple to bring on. So thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having us, really.
Yeah. So a good thing to do is let's go ahead and start with your guys' video, and then I have some questions, and I know our audience as well will have some questions for you guys as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think we're going to do some polls. One starts during the video, and we'll go over all those handouts. So that's great.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, let's get started.
Awesome.
Hi, and thank you for taking the time to hear our story and learn what we came to know, how and why medical cannabis can be a safe and effective tool for people at the end of life. I'm Chela.
And I'm Dave. And right up front, we'd like to say that we're not doctors or medical professionals of any kind, and nothing you hear in this presentation should be considered medical advice.
Right.
We work below the line in film and television production, but in 2010, after my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia, we dove into family caregiving and became fierce advocates for people at the end of life.
In memory of Mom and to honor our journey together, we started providing care gap training for other family care partners at CoachChela.com and created Cannabis Helps Dementia podcast.
We've interviewed dozens of doctors, nurses, professional researchers, administrators, other caregivers, and people living with dementia about how cannabis helps, all the way till the end.
Like it did for our family.
Right.
We've since published a guidebook on the subject called CBD for Seniors, 12 Things to Know When Trying CBD or Medicinal Cannabis to Ease the Symptoms of Aging and Improve Brain Health, available on Amazon. During this short presentation, we'll share the parts of the book that are important for context, we'll review the end-of-life portion, and make sure you know your rights as well.
Okay, what if there was a scientifically recognized system in the human body that regulated every other bodily system, and it wasn't taught in most medical schools?
That would be weird.
Right? Okay, quick question. How many of you know that we all have a system like that called the endocannabinoid system, or ECS?
But to help us get on the same page, we made this short video about the ECS to help understand how cannabis works in the body.
Cannabis has been the subject of so many jokes and stereotypes and so much propaganda that it's hard for some people to imagine that marijuana could be a legitimate medical treatment.
Maybe you smoked some pot in college, or tried the brownie your nephew gave you, or you or a loved one may have overused cannabis and can't imagine how it could be medicine. But science tells us that cannabis is indeed just that.
It's impossible to understand that cannabis is medicine without knowing something about the endocannabinoid system.
Like that it exists, for instance. A quick PubMed search yields over 6,000 research studies on the subject.
Problem is, most medical professionals don't study anything about the endocannabinoid system in medical school or continuing education, due in part to the outdated federal policy on cannabis prohibition.
Cannabinoids, the chemical compounds in cannabis and other plants as well, interact with many parts of the body. Until the 1990s, we didn't know how exactly.
Then researchers traced where a THC molecule landed and began to discover that we have a system in our body that regulates all the other systems through chemistry.
The system in the body that interacts with plant cannabinoids was discovered, and then researchers found chemicals that our own bodies make that interact with that same system.
It's called the endocannabinoid system, and the compounds we make in our bodies are called endogenous or endocannabinoids.
The endocannabinoid system is established in scientific literature. Researchers are finding that the endocannabinoid system is involved in balancing nearly every system of the body.
It's interesting that even though the endocannabinoid system is established science, most healthcare professionals don't learn about it and still don't understand how cannabis helps people.
Make sure you ask your doctor if they've studied the endocannabinoid system before you ask them if cannabis medicine is right for you. Okay, now that we know a little about the ECS, we can begin to understand how CBD and medical cannabis could be helpful at easing symptoms at the end of life.
At the end of life, CBD and medical cannabis can help relieve pain, anxiety, depression, nausea, anorexia, insomnia, and reduce the number of drugs a person is taking.
Cannabis can even ease spiritual or existential suffering.
And you have a right to try experimental treatments if they can help.
The trailblazers of cannabis-based medicine therapy have always been the patients and family caregivers, occasionally with guidance of brave clinicians.
A more recent movement by those in the fight is to introduce CBD and medicinal cannabis for use in palliative and hospice care.
At the end of my mom's journey living with Alzheimer's disease, when she was in hospice and receiving palliative care herself, I was building a binder full of research showing the benefits of medical cannabis for people living with dementia, and came across a study that found CBD helped morphine work better. At Mom's end of life, despite all the morphine she was on, she still had very labored breathing. It's sometimes called a death rattle. We tried a few milligrams of full-spectrum CBD oil between her lips and gums every hour, and it completely eased her breathing for 4 days until she peacefully left us. The hospice staff has reached out to me many times since then to remind us that my mom's was the most peaceful passing they'd ever witnessed.
There are many ways to take CBD and medicinal cannabis with no smoking required and no need to feel high. You can use different delivery methods to get different benefits and use different routes of administration to find what's best for the symptoms you're trying to relieve.
There are several ways to take cannabis medicine at the end of life. Inhaling cannabis using a vape or smoking is very fast-acting, but only lasts about an hour. Also, depending on the setting, it may or may not be allowed.
Using a tincture, like we did with Mom, rubbing the oil into her gums is simple, but the flavor may not be acceptable to some folks. A gummy, candy, or mint can also be used.
topical and transdermal application is gentle and easy. A transdermal patch can last several hours, but it's not always available. Using CBD or cannabis with other medicines can help the other meds work better.
According to a 2019 study, an accumulation of many prescription drugs at the end of life increases the side effect symptoms from those drugs and decreases quality of life. When CBD in medical cannabis is introduced, for many people, the need for a number of prescription medications is reduced as well.
Cannabis connects with endocannabinoid system receptors that can help relieve severe pain, muscle spasms, and reduce inflammation.
People also use cannabis to relieve nausea, constipation, improve fatigue, sleep issues, and cannabis can stimulate appetite and weight gain.
Cannabis is helpful with overwhelming emotions, anxiety, fear, and mood issues during the end of life. Everyone deserves to have a sense of well-being. Palliative and hospice care aim to optimize one's comfort, but we don't think anyone should have to wait till the end to improve their quality of life.
Cannabis has a long history in medicine, from ancient China to Egypt and Israel, to a physician in 1843 who describes the therapeutic actions of hemp tinctures on several different patient populations, including palliative care.
Cannabis is known for heightened sensory perception. Cannabis helps us appreciate music, flavors and smells, sights and sounds. It can also help heighten awareness of moment-to-moment presence, which is valuable throughout life.
Cannabis can be therapeutic for patients faced with the despair of a terminal illness and the loss of function that accompanies it. Also, a mild euphoria could bring about a sense of well-being. In areas of the U.S. where cannabis medicine is not legal, clinicians can recommend hemp-based CBD and also prescribe an FDA-approved synthetic THC in a product called Marinol. It's used to treat loss of appetite that causes weight loss and muscle wasting, and to treat severe nausea and vomiting caused by cancer chemotherapy.
Consult with a knowledgeable healthcare provider to help manage multiple medications.
Researcher S.K. Agarwal in Palliative Care in Oncology addresses a terminally ill patient's right to access cannabis in Facilitation of a Patient's Right to Access Experimental Treatments in Line with Their Wishes and Beliefs in Service of Hope.
Several states, including California, have adopted laws that protect end-of-life patients' right to access cannabis medicine in certain federally funded facilities like hospitals, nursing, and veterans facilities.
California lawmakers got clarity from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, before passing California's Ryan's Law, signed by the governor in 2021. The author of the bill wrote, "CMS has confirmed that the Medicare and Medicaid regulations do not address the use of medical cannabis, and CMS states that it is not aware of a provider that has specifically lost funding or been penalized for permitting the use of medical cannabis. Furthermore, CMS states it would not cite healthcare facilities for allowing medical cannabis use unless the U.S. Department of Justice has made an adverse finding."
Currently, the United States Department of Justice is prohibited to use any federal funds to interfere with state medical cannabis laws. The Biden administration has made every indication that it will not interfere with state cannabis laws, medical or adult use.
This wasn't enough for California facilities, however, and the legislature recently passed a clarification to Ryan's Law, SB 988. It basically says that facilities can't stop an end-of-life patient from arranging for a loved one or caregiver to help administrate medicinal cannabis.
If CBD or medical cannabis is legal in your state, you have a right to access this medicine.
As of April 2023, medical cannabis is legal in 38 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia. 9 states have low THC laws.
CBD, in some form, is legal in all 50 states now.
CBD and medical cannabis is allowed in some care facilities.
It's been 25 years since the citizens of California passed Prop 215, becoming the first state to make medicinal cannabis legal, or at least decriminalized.
Subsequent legislation created the nation's first quasi-legal medical cannabis program. Much has changed since 1996, and even 2010, when we first began using medical cannabis for mom.
Yet medical professionals are still not required to know about the endocannabinoid system or how cannabis might help their patients.
Some of the obstacles to getting this medicine to those who need it most include More than 85 years of prohibitionist propaganda at every level of society.
Which then created a lack of provider education and promoted fear in American culture about using cannabis at all.
Paying for all your products is almost exclusively done in cash, as cannabis remains on the most restrictive Schedule 1 of drugs, making it federally illegal to do any credit card transactions. Additionally, state legal cannabis businesses don't have access to normal banking or standard business expense deductions.
Labeling and packaging requirements of state legal cannabis products differ from the requirements for labeling and packaging of pharmaceutical products used in a medical setting, creating a conflict and hesitation by facilities to use this safe and effective tool.
Cannabis is thought of as other narcotics in states that allow it. Facilities are required to inventory those medicines at every shift. Most cannabis packaging is not created with this in mind. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, as of April 2023, a total of 38 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands have approved comprehensive and publicly available medical cannabis programs.
9 other states have low THC, high CBD laws. Idaho, Nebraska, and Kansas have no legal cannabis programs.
CBD from hemp is legal federally, and all 50 states allow hemp-based CBD. However, Idaho only allows THC-free CBD products. Laws pertaining to the use of CBD and medicinal cannabis in care facilities vary from state to state, and many that have made cannabis access legal have created guidance for the use of medical cannabis in their facilities. Most, if not all, federally funded nursing homes or VA facilities will not allow any form of medical cannabis or CBD due to the fear of losing funding over the Schedule 1 status of the Controlled Substances Act.
As we learned from the California Ryan's Law drama, this fear seems unwarranted, and there's never been a case recorded of this happening, nor does the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have any regulations that address the use of CBD nor medical cannabis. In our case, it became a don't ask, don't tell situation. After the first nursing home kicked Mom out for a positive THC drug test, after we were honest about what we had found to be so successful, they said, "There'll be none of that here," which initiated the drug screenings. We never discussed using medical cannabis with the next and final care facility we found, but it was close enough to home that I could bring her some medicine every day for 4 years until the day she passed in 2019.
Also in 2019, the Society for Post-Acute and Long-Term Care Medicine put out a white paper on the use of marijuana in nursing homes. In part, it says that they support patient-centered decision-making. If there is consensus from the clinician and resident that marijuana has substantial clinical benefit that justify the risks, the facility administration must have established policies and procedures in place. And clinicians and staff caring for residents receiving marijuana in these settings should have training and education in the administration, monitoring, and use of marijuana. The National Council of State Boards of Nursing believe that nurses should know about the benefits and risks using medical cannabis and first published guidelines in 2018 with regular updates.
To start the conversation with your providers, present data supporting the need for medical cannabis use. Share studies with them. Include observed benefits and expectations. Happier patients mean happier staff and lower turnover.
Work with your local ombudsman if you have any issues.
My mom had greater focus and interaction when she was medicated with cannabis. She laughed, smiled, and communicated with us. Cannabis helped Mom have a carefree attitude about losing her mind, and cannabis medicine even soothed her at the end. Cannabis helped ease my mom's symptoms from the moment we started using it until her last breath, but only because we were willing and able to make sure she had it.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you feel like you've learned about how and why cannabis helps people at the end of life.
Connect with us at CoachChela.com for resources, events, guidebooks, private coaching, and more, and on the socials at Coach Chela Consulting.
Check out the Cannabis Helps Dementia podcast, where we post interviews with leading-edge clinicians, researchers, family caregivers, and people living with dementia about how cannabis helps at CannabisHelpsDementia.com.
We're wishing you all the best in your journey.
That was wonderful. I told you guys this yesterday when I previewed the video, but I think that was just such a great video. It was so comprehensive. I really love how you guys included. I really appreciated the statement from the CMS because I think a lot of people really, um, I think a lot of centers, that are housing our loved ones worry about losing their federal funding for having,
Mhm.
cannabis on site. And that's what they hear, I think, from a lot of these facilities. And so
Right.
including that statement, and you can bring this video or even just that slide and say, no, in fact, nobody has ever lost federal funding for allowing cannabis on site. I think
Mhm.
that piece of information was very helpful.
We have a
And
copy of the letter we carry with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah,
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 Yeah.
I think
There it is, right
that
there.
yeah, that piece of information, and also the information about how to start the conversation was very, very helpful. And then those wonderful examples of how it really helped your mother, in the end of life was, so touching. And so that was such a great video. Thank you guys for putting that together, and sharing all this information. I
It's how one of the ways we communicate. And I'm pretty sure all of the links to those studies and a lot of the nurses' links to those societies and all of those guidelines are all in one of the handouts. So
wonderful.
folks can get to that information, use that, say, hey, you're supposed to know about this stuff. and and really, someone said in the chat during the thing that they got in trouble for using CBD.
Hmm.
Their parent. And yeah, we got kicked out because
we
we were
got totally
honest,
kicked out.
because we weren't able to medicate her anymore with the cannabis, and it led to her being asked to leave.
Definitely.
So it can be challenging, even in states like California where it's legal, everywhere else. And the facilities in California are supposed to have procedures to use them if they allow them, and it's mostly the private facilities that do in California.
Yeah.
But there are a few.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Unfortunately, some of these facilities, aren't educated, aren't, keeping up with what the actual laws are. And they have these zero tolerance policies,
Right.
which are really unfortunate, and they're, like you said, they're not really actually following the current laws.
Yeah.
And I see some of the viewers saying that they're going to actually share some of these videos with the directors, the owners of some of these facilities. So that's wonderful to hear. So yeah, here in California, we're really lucky that we do have, Ryan's Law. So for those maybe who don't know about Ryan's Law, it was, you know, um, the project of a father who had lost his son. His son was just about 30 years old, and he was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And sort of similar to your mother, they, had to go through a couple of care facilities. The son said, I know what's going to work for me, and what's going to make me feel at peace and give me comfort in the last days, and I want to use cannabis. And they had to move to a couple of facilities to find one that would let him use cannabis. And he lost a lot of time during that. And his father said, after his son had passed, I'm going to dedicate my life to changing the law so people can have access to what they need. And for a couple of years it didn't actually pass, which was kind of sad. And it did pass, which is wonderful. So now it's a California law that those that have a terminal condition have the right to have access to it in a hospital setting. And like you said, they have now they're now trying to extend that so that seniors with a chronic condition, right, will now have access to cannabis in facilities, which is just wonderful.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about, other states and what they're doing as well?
Yeah, so of course we know that it's Ryan's father, Jim, his mission to spread it everywhere. And I know that they're working on it in Hawaii for sure. It didn't make it in this session, but hopefully next session it'll get a little more traction. It just seems like a no-brainer. I know it's discussed at all of the different hospice conventions and symposiums, and I know it's a big topic of conversation, certainly for the last few years. Because people are more honest because cannabis is legal in so many states.
23 and moving up.
Right. And then medicinally legal in
Right.
46 and CBD everywhere. It is a topic of conversation in the hospice and palliative care setting. So they know that It's coming. And, you know, like the boards of nurses believes that, you know, nurses need to know about it. And then, of course, there are the great organizations like the Cannabis Nurses Network that was very influential in getting Ryan's Law passed. And then the American Cannabis Nurses Association, the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, and other groups like that that are helping to educate doctors. But it is a very, very few. I mean, we really believe that the endocannabinoid system should be taught in biology class, like basic biology, just like when you learn about the reproductive system and that you have a musculoskeletal system, you also have an endocannabinoid system. It's not controversial. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
You know? So that's kind of where it's at. I know that there are, wherever it's medicinally legal, Florida, you know, anywhere that's New York, all the places where it's medicinally legal, definitely talk to an open provider about it, or ask a cannabis provider, a cannabis doctor in that state, how you can talk to your primary care provider about it. I know Dr. Sulak is really good about communicating with doctors about cannabis medicine, and he's a wonderful teacher, and he has you know, a great relationship with all the primary cares that he has patients with. So talk to a local doctor who is knowledgeable, and then share it with your primary care if that's something you want to do, or take the route that we took. You know, we just didn't talk about it to the next facility. And I don't know that they wrote it down in my mom's chart, or they didn't notice it maybe.
The staff knew.
Yeah, the staff knew.
But
we didn't tell them.
The management
but they
didn't
knew.
know. Yeah.
You know?
And you know, and it really, in all the way to the end, you know, as the laws changed, because when Mom started,
yeah,
in our journey with Mom, we, you know, literally had to get a bottle of olive oil infused, you know, at a small dispensary in West Hollywood.
Yeah, really good one.
Really good one. Yeah. But you know, you didn't even know what was in it.
Well, I had no idea.
How many milligrams or anything. So the laws changed over the whole journey with Mom, and then we were able to start using near the end with the very end with some of the regulated products,
tinctures,
and CBD, of course, became much more accessible then, and that really helped at the end.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's changed a lot now too. There's a lot more ways to get you know, low dose or even moderate dose subtly into folks in the form of chocolates or gummies. And there's patches with the patches work great for pain. You know, so there's a lot of ways now that you can be more subtle about it than
tea.
Yeah, tea. The teas are great.
Tea, and you can even make your own tea. You know, Coco's is amazing, but you can make your own tea by just taking a nice clean bud and putting it in your teacup and pouring the hot water over it and enjoying the tea and chewing up the bud after. And
it's THCA.
Yeah, you know, that's all good stuff.
Yeah.
So there are many different ways, but yeah,
there's a lot of options nowadays, but for like those states maybe where it's not legal yet, you know, definitely, you know, support those that are trying to change the law, you know, would be a good action item, you know, sign any kind of petitions, and maybe, you know, if you see that it is working for your loved one, you know, to maybe, you know, talk to their healthcare team, you know, and to share the good work that it's doing. And so that maybe, you know, those laws will change and you could help other people. But I would say
it's CBD to start the conversation, and then you might be able to evolve it.
Right. You could just start with CBD and evolve it into it. And a lot of the legal states, the 38 states that have formal programs, they have some state regulations in place. Some of the states on how, you know, it's to be used in, you know, in certain settings and things like that. California is the only one that has it codified that you have a right to it. So,
when you're dying.
Right? When you're dying. So I mean, start with your local, you know, whatever your laws are, you know, locally, and use the ombudsman, you know, whenever
if there's
you can.
A problem,
Definitely. And we've in some of the handouts we have the dosing chart, or rather the delivery method chart, a new updated one, which has a number of options and how the things work, and then also the ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, and then also a Know Your Rights chart on some of the strategies on how to introduce if your loved one is in a facility and you want to try to introduce it into that setting,
Mm-hmm.
some tips and ways to do it in that handout as well.
Yeah.
So,
And all the handouts
all in
are
the
also
book.
in the book too.
Oh, part of the book, yeah.
And if you buy the book digitally, you have links to every study in the book.
Right.
Oh, that's really, really helpful. That's great. And so what I would also say too, would it be a good tip, is in most of these states, like you talked about, a good majority of the states, almost all of them now, have medical cannabis laws. If you're going to give your loved one cannabis and they're in a health facility, you should, try to arrange for a medical cannabis recommendation for that patient.
Yes,
In a lot of states now you can get this done, over the telephone or online, or maybe even get like the general, healthcare physician to write a medical cannabis recommendation. So you could say, my, mother, my grandfather, has been authorized to use this medicine, medicinally, they have the legal permission to do so. You can put that in their chart, here's some legal protection that they're allowed to have this. That is just like a little bit of cover for everybody, which is a great thing to have.
Yeah.
Now, for like somebody that's new to cannabis, if somebody gets senior citizen, I'm always telling them, go low, go slow. Now, with somebody, who's like facing an end of life journey, that may not be as much of a consideration. Would you still say that you would want to go low and go slow if that person is like dealing with like a high amount of pain? Like, what would you say in that situation? Would you still want to, creep in, or would you want to maybe be a little bit more aggressive with the dosing?
I would start low, because some people and the tone of their endocannabinoid system might be really, really sensitive. I don't want to scare anybody away from this medicine ever. So if somebody takes like a 2.5 milligram or a half a gummy for their first dose and they don't feel anything, great, no problem. We can always add more.
Yeah.
But if they take a 10 milligram gummy right out of the gate and they have a bad experience, then they may not be willing to try again.
Yeah.
So my concern would be that they'd be turned off it because they had a bad experience, rather than not feeling anything the first time. In fact, there are, a number of clinicians who say that's good.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But I know it depends on the window that we're talking about. Are we talking like terminal months or terminal hours?
Yeah.
If it's whether morphine or high THC oil, they complement each other very well, as well as CBD. I mean,
and opioids
and other opioids.
Without constipation,
right?
The cannabis. Right?
So if you start with your THC, if you're first of all, if you're an experienced user, that's one thing.
Right, of course.
But if you're there is great benefit. Dustin Sulak just did a presentation on his last webinar on the studies he's doing with very low dose THC and the success in lots of areas like pain. So starting low and going slow is not necessarily a bad thing to get to where you want to be. It's a balance, really. Does someone want to be knocked out all day on the couch using an RS, a FICO oil with a high THC?
Likely not.
Likely not. They want to be present maybe with their family. So everyone has that balance. It's all up to the individual patient. And the beauty of the endocannabinoid system in cannabis is that if you're new, you start, you can get that going, get your endocannabinoid system started with a low dose, and then that window starts to open up, and then you can increase over 2-3 days. You can just slowly start to increase. And like I say, like it says in those studies, the mild euphoria is maybe not such a bad thing at the end of life.
No, anytime.
A nice balanced 1-to-1, so you don't get, as we know, the straight THC, as Dr. Russo says, can be a rough drug. So having a little bit of a CBD and to complement that is a good way to go. So like a 1-to-1 maybe for someone who's very new to cannabis.
But be aware, sometimes CBD is irritating to some people in small amounts. And I recently found that with a 90-year-old client. And that was I knew about it because, of course, we interviewed nurse practitioner Eloise Thiessen, who shared that story on Cannabis Helps Dementia podcast and elsewhere, where that happened to one of her clients. And it was a big surprise, of course. We all think that CBD is this benign, easy thing that's not going to upset anybody. But holy smokes, when it makes somebody aggravated, it's a big surprise. Even
Yeah.
still, it doesn't happen very often. I mean, it's been years and I've had one client like that. So just be aware that some people don't do so great with CBD.
Yeah, that's
And,
very
and like you say, you're looking for that euphoria, you're going to need the THC.
Yeah, a little bit,
And certainly for some acute pain,
a little more.
working with other opioids,
Yeah.
having the THC.
But CBD works on different avenues of
Right.
relieving pain. So certain types of pain might need a CBD component. So,
Yeah.
as longtime cannabis users, we often will discount CBD, but really, the more I learn, the more I know it's really an essential nutrient. It's like a vitamin.
Yep.
You should have it every day. It should be in the food supply.
Well, thank you for that answer. And I would definitely agree with you guys. I was just interested in your expert opinion. And I would say same thing, that if somebody's, never experienced cannabis, still make sure you start low, make sure that they can tolerate cannabis, that they don't have any kind of like adverse reaction. But if it seems like after like a couple days that they're doing well with it, you could probably, increase a little bit faster than they would with like a regular person, and that you don't have to worry about what the typical things like a fall kind of situation, because they're in bed, and, if, it needs to be a little bit more, to kind of help with that pain, then that's something, that's okay. And if you have some euphoria and intoxication, that's only going to, make them feel more comfort and, maybe a little bit of joy, which is totally fine, So thank you for that insight. And I completely agree with you guys. So, so no, I know that you guys have went through some experiences where you had a medical team, at these assisted living facilities, that didn't really agree with your guys's treatment. So, what would you recommend if you have a facility that doesn't agree, with your guys' decision, or maybe even like you have some family members who aren't on the same page as you? What are some pointers that you guys would give people that are watching?
So the same, the studies, try to encourage them to read and connect with the studies. I know they're not, double blind, placebo controlled, yada, yada, but, we still have quite a few studies. And honestly, there's a great resource called Cannakeys, cannakeys.com. It's like a PubMed, which is a database for studies, peer-reviewed studies. It's the PubMed for cannabis and terpenes, and they include body systems and multiple different medical conditions. It's a great resource. So you can find a lot of studies at Cannakeys.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's an awesome resource. And then also, if you're coming up against the facility, then you definitely want to involve the ombudsman. For sure. I mean, we had like the most disastrous experience. She got thrown out. It was like a huge drama. If I had involved the ombudsman earlier on, it might have been better, but it was still, this was like 2013, 14. So, we weren't where we are now. And so if it's now, I would say definitely, like the moment I walk in the door, I talk to the ombudsman and I start making friends with them. And obviously my loved one would already have a recommendation and the state card. Well, maybe not a state card because it's hard to get my loved one to go down to a state office, which is where you have to get the state card. But we would have a medical recommendation from a doctor and go in with the studies. I happen to have a few studies compiled about how cannabis helps dementia. So, and I do keep this up to date. It was a big undertaking when I first put it together, so I feel like it's important to maintain.
But we're still getting kicked out of facilities.
We're still getting kicked out of facilities. Still.
As educators.
Yeah, totally.
Another different webinar.
But yes, it's same smell, man. I mean, in the great state of California, you can't talk about CBD for seniors.
So it's a challenge
at hospitals.
For sure. And part of the challenge often is family and family members. I mean, if you are, if your loved one who is going through this at the end of life is already on board and has used cannabis and is like, hey, I want to do it like Ryan is like, listen, I don't want to do opioids. I want to be alert. I want to be around. This actually
happened with your brother. This happened with Dave's brother a year ago, almost to the day.
It's sort of.
Yes, he liked medical cannabis, but the rest of the family, no. No.
Unfortunately, he couldn't make decisions.
And he was not able to
right away. So
talk.
Yeah.
So when I went in the room, I put it on his feet, and his belly button. And when he was conscious and asked me for it, I gave him CBD, CBG with trace amounts of THC. And those were the nights he slept the best.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie. So yeah, but family members, it's very hard.
Yeah.
And if someone, and like we're going through another circumstance right now with a family member who is throughout our whole life as educators and proponents of cannabis and CBD. They've read the book, they bought the book for friends, but they still won't use CBD. They're older folks, and it might be the end of the road for one of them, and they've never been willing to. So to introduce it at this point,
he asked
now,
in passing, but that was it.
There's a lot going on, and to try to push something on that's on the family
it's not
and the loved
welcome.
ones, it's that hasn't been really welcome to start with.
You have to read the room.
You gotta read the room.
You have to read the room.
But if the patient's wishes from the beginning have been, I'm a user, I want to do this, if it's legal in your state, you have a right to use it.
Yep.
If it's legal medically or adult use in your state, you have a right to use it as an experimental treatment. And the ombudsman should be on your side to do that.
Yes.
You can't smoke.
No smoking
in facilities. Although that is for a lot of cancer patients and a lot of people who are
the fastest acting.
That are copacetic. It's the fastest acting, and they like to use it that way. But in settings and facilities, that's basically a no-go.
Yeah.
So
there's so many other ways to apply it though nowadays.
Sorry?
I said there's so many ways to apply it nowadays between patches, topicals, sublinguals, edibles,
tea.
Teas.
Suppositories.
Suppositories.
Into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Suppositories are a great route.
Yeah.
Well, so it's tricky and challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. When family dynamics come into play, it makes it even more difficult, but you guys have provided some very helpful tips. So that's great. Now, you also mentioned too about, policies and procedures, is there any, resources that people could maybe pull from, for guidance, like if, their, assisted living facility maybe is open to it, but they, don't really have the time to write policies and procedures for administering or allowing cannabis on the facility that maybe they could refer to instead of going through all that work. Cause sometimes they're so busy applying care that they don't really have time to pull that stuff together. And maybe that's their excuse for not allowing it to come into their facility. Have you ever come across any of that could be a resource?
Yes. The Americans for Safe Access and also the Cannabis Nurses Network have policies and procedures for facilities, how to implement Ryan's Law in California, ready to rock and roll. So there's really no excuse from a facility other than the stigma, the propaganda, and their misinformation. So there is also on the Americans for Safe Access website a form where you can complain if the facility is not complying with Ryan's Law.
Because it is a state law. So
it is a state law. This is your right. It is a law. It is codified, signed by the governor. So there are lots of
reasons. It's not very hard to pass,
Yes. And right now, SB 302, write your assembly member and the governor to get that one passed so that we can expand this guaranteed right to everyone 65 and over with a chronic condition. And then we'll work on everybody.
That's wonderful. I have a couple of viewer questions. Are you guys open to taking a couple?
Yeah, for sure.
So we have somebody asking, and we'd actually cover this, but what about side effects? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. The worst side effects with cannabis medicine, are for Coumadin, warfarin, a blood thinner, which likely you're not really on when you're in hospice, because usually it's
drug interactions. Side effects of THC or side effect of cannabis or the drug interactions. I'm sure maybe I'm not. What was the?
I think there's a cannabis in general.
Well,
without getting into the drug interaction, which could be various depending on what drug you're on, just in cannabis in general.
Sure. So, the two drug interactions that are the worst are Coumadin, warfarin, and Depakote. Depakote might still be on board, but usually in hospice, it's just comfort meds. So those meds no longer a concern. So other interactions, one of the studies that I came across was mentioned in the video about how CBD helps morphine work better.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the time, you can reduce other medicines when you have cannabis on board. General side effects of cannabis, euphoria is a side effect. Some people don't like to feel that. So that's a concern for some people. It is in the literature that dizziness and falls are potential, but none of the doctors we know or have ever spoken to have actually really experienced that.
And most people at the end of life probably aren't
running around by themselves,
getting around, not on their own.
So I mean, yes, we're talking about in this context, right? An end of life context. Of course, there might be other side effects to be concerned about in another context, maybe say with people living with dementia. And if you're taking any sedating drugs, it can make the other drugs more sedating. So that's why you can get off of the opioids, because the cannabis is doing that pain killing, and you won't have the side effects from the opioids. So side effects from cannabis, yeah, there are some. You can have some dizziness, heart palpitations, but they're usually dose dependent. And usually for relief at the end of life, you don't need heroic doses.
Right.
Yeah.
The heroic doses are for people who are trying to save their life.
Mm-hmm.
Usually for people fighting cancer, who aren't ready to go yet. So in the context of this webinar, the side effects are very manageable and usually dose dependent. So you're not really going to run into too much of a problem. There is a drug interaction checker at drugs.com if you ever want to check it. I did check CBD and cannabis, cannabidiol and cannabis, and it said there is a mild interaction there, so be careful.
CBD?
Correct. THC,
and
cannabis.
THC? Oh, interesting.
Yes. Oh, no, you just undermine yourself. Now,
they can work together in the entourage.
They do work together in the entourage effect,
So,
but it doesn't make it worse. True. It makes it gentler, So it's a weird take that they had on that. So just
because drug interactions can be good and they can be bad. Like you said, like the opioid and THC drug interaction is actually good. It actually makes the opioid work better, so you need less of it. But they can be bad, and they can actually make drugs work less, which is a bad thing. So, it can go both ways.
Accumulate and then be too much at a certain point. But really, when we're talking about hospice, people are on comfort meds, and that should, more or less be well handled.
Yeah. Another reason too why it's a good idea to get that medical cannabis recommendation and run those drugs, by a physician, if you're taking multiple. And another thing I want to say about side effects is that, some side effects are benefits that people actually are seeking, like the hunger, the euphoria, those are side effects for some, but for some, they're wanted benefits of cannabis. They're things that people actually are seeking. So it just, depends on, the person. So that's very interesting too. There's another question too. Somebody's asking, can cannabis be added to your medical directive?
I
don't see why not.
We should start a trend.
Yeah, just put that in writing.
Especially since in the state of California, since it's the
it's
state
in mine.
law.
Well, I'll just start doing that, and if everybody's doing it,
Get me out of the hospital and pump me full of cannabis.
It's a quote. That was when my brother was dying last year.
I came home and did my thing right away.
And another question, I know you answered this in the chat. Somebody's asking, does full spectrum CBD mean that there's THC in it? I know you answered this, but I want you to answer it again for everybody that's watching, because they may also be wondering as well.
Absolutely. So yes, full spectrum includes THC. It depends on how much. So full spectrum from hemp contains 0.3% THC. 1-to-1 contains both full spectrum, and it's a full spectrum 1-to-1 that has CBD and THC 1-to-1, because now there's lots of ratios in the world. But yes, it includes THC, even if it's a little bit.
Essentially, it means it contains all the constituents of the plant that it came from. So if it's coming from a hemp plant, which is legally 0.3 THC, that's what's
not regulated.
But it's got all the flavonoids, the terpenes, everything that comes in the plant is in that oil or whatever product it is. And broad spectrum can have some stuff, removed or
Does not have
isolate,
THC.
without THC removed and has other things in it. That's not a full spectrum. And then, of course, there's isolate, which can be just straight CBD, CBG, THC, and a lot of the hemp isolates all the CBs are pretty much all available, through, good, legitimate hemp places.
Make sure it's always third-party tested.
Make sure it's all tested, not gas station. And of course, the best is from Full Spectrum Cannabis.
Yeah.
That's where the real, even if you're getting a 20-to-1 or something higher with a, higher ratio, it's better to get it from Full Spectrum. So you have access to a legal dispensary. That's really the best place to get it.
Yeah. Well, you guys gave us some wonderful answers. Thank you so much. You guys have been like wonderful guests. Thank you so much for putting together that wonderful video. It's a great resource. I know that, everybody that's watched and, everyone that's going to have access to these videos is going to be able to use them as a tool to talk to their families and to their, healthcare team. And, hopefully we get access and comfort to a lot of people, that can benefit from this. Is there anything coming up? I'm sorry?
Now let us know what happened. If you do
definitely
do this in your lives with your loved ones, let us know how it's going. We really want to know. Reach out to us anywhere, whether it's the socials or email or whatever.
Make sure you download the handouts. There's links to a bunch of the studies that we talked about, and also ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, which talks about dosing, how to get started, and how to find some tips on finding good cannabis, what to look for, and getting your ratio correct, and the dosing, rather the delivery method chart, which you can find the best way that you could for your loved one or for you.
What's coming up next for us? Yes. So next, we want to start a CBD for seniors open forum that will give people an opportunity to, much like these webinars, but we'll talk for a few minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes at the beginning about studies and laws and things that are changing, and then do caregiver roundtable or person living with the thing about what you're all using and what's working for everybody, so that we can share information among people who are doing the thing.
I love that.
So that's something we're going to start, and we're going to be going to the First Friday event.
First Friday event
at the party in LA.
So excited about
that.
That's
fun.
Yeah.
So,
that's wonderful. And then for anybody that's not, in the live webinar, are all the handouts that you guys shared in the book as well?
Yes.
Yes. Everything's in the book.
That's that we're going to we need to update our delivery methods for the book, but that's an updated one in the handouts that's going to go in the next edition of the book. So it'll be in the e-version soon. But make sure those are all part of the book, though. Sure, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys.
This presentation specifically, but I believe a lot of those are in the book as well.
Yeah. They're all in the book.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for what you do. Like everywhere I go, I tell people about the wonderful work you do with family with Alzheimer's and dementia, and end of life care. It's not easy. It's one of the more difficult things to navigate, and you guys have the experience and you guys have, the mindset, and, I really, really thank you guys, for taking the time to do this and for helping people the way that you do. And thank you guys so much for being our guest speakers today.
Awesome.
Thank you for having us,
so
Candace.
much. Really. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you. We love what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for watching. And I know that you guys are watching because you're probably taking care of loved ones at home as well. And we appreciate you guys as well. It's not an easy job. You're giving your homes and your lives to take care of your loved ones, and to give them a quality of life. So we thank you as well. We appreciate you. I hope that today we were able to help provide some information to all of you to help you guys become better informed caregivers and better informed cannabis consumers, and that we were able to provide some information that will help you find some relief. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you again for another episode of the Friends of the Farm lecture series. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.